The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everyone to this IMARC webinar, How Can the Mining Industry Make Diversity a Reality? My name is Anita Richards. I'm the General Manager of Mines and Money and IMARC. This year, diversity is a key focus for IMARC, and we're delighted to be leading this conversation today. Personally, I'm quite passionate about this topic. I believe that everyone, despite gender, race, background, circumstance, should have an opportunity. I believe in empowering people, creating a more welcoming and inclusive environment, and in turn we'll all benefit from that. Personally, in my career, I have seen it firsthand in how diverse teams make for a stronger team. You need to understand the individual, you need to set a tone for an inclusive and flexible workforce. You can see that then in the performance and growth of the team as well as the company itself. When we see inclusiveness across the industry, I believe that we see stronger economies, we see better productivity, I believe everyone learns and everyone benefits. So I'm going to introduce you to our panellists today, but before I do that, we have a few housekeeping items to kick off. We are recording this webinar, and then we'll be emailing you a copy of the recording out to all of the registrants. So if you need to drop off at any time, don't worry, you will receive the rest of the conversation in your inbox tomorrow. The session is designed to be an interactive webinar, so we welcome any questions. You just have to type them into the question tab in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. We also welcome any comments that you may want to contribute to the conversation. If you have any issues with sound, we recommend that you would exit the webinar and then try logging back in again. Okay, so today I am joined by Alex Atkins, who's the Managing Director and Principal of Alex Atkins and Associates, and also is part of Women in Mining International. We've got Kate Hobbs, who's Transformation Consultant at Oz Minerals, and also Nick Flanagan, Regional GM of WSP Australia. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. So we'll just jump straight in, I think, with our first question. And we all know that there's been a lot of talk about diversity in the industry at the moment particularly. Sometimes there's a risk of that being a bit of a catch cry. I think it's really important that we focus on diversity and inclusion, which includes gender, race, disability, age, and sexual orientation. So first of all, I'd like to start by asking each panelist what diversity means to them and why it's important. So I'm going to open up with Alex, if you could let us know.
Hi, Anita. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I agree, diversity is more, it's about more than just gender, but all diversities are not mutually exclusive. I think we need to focus on retention and development of finding experienced STEM women, because without this focus there will be minimal positive outcomes in the short and long term. There will only be gaming for optics, conflation and obfuscation. You can Google those words, guys, which means no change to the status quo. To date, gender equity in mining is mainly focused on generic attraction with a low barrier to entry, and it's missing initiatives for STEM women in industry like mining engineers, geotechnical engineers, geologists and metallurgists, especially on their retention and development. Generic gender equity dilutes the point of difference or value proposition of mining STEM women to their detriment, and it's creating a backlash which plays into the hands of the incumbents of the status quo, who argue against gender diversity based on their version of a meritocracy. And the meritocracy argument plays into the hands of women who are not miners per se, like lawyers and accountants. Just check out who gets on boards and into executive leadership teams. These women do add enormous commercial acumen to mining's leadership, but mining STEM women also bring deep domain expertise and operational experience. They often bring values aligned with the current ESG push from proxy advisors and ethical investor groups for better management of technical and operational risk, which will help prevent value destructive events and promote value creation through discovery, optimisation and innovation. Thanks, Anita.
Thanks so much, Alex. And I'll ask Kate the same question.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. Alex, you honed in on a really important point there around, where do all the mining women go? They certainly don't find their way onto boards. I think it's something like 70 to 80% of women on mining company boards actually come from outside our industry and don't have that deep domain expertise. So it's always been a question that I've asked myself as to where do where do the mining women go? So in terms of the question, so diversity to me is really like ignoring what type of diversity we're talking about. It's just about accepting, welcoming and seeking out difference. So that real inclusion piece, it's enabling everyone to bring their self to every situation without that fear of persecution just because they're different. One of the big things for me is diversity and inclusion is really about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because diversity in essence is difference, no matter what the difference is. So it's really about being challenged, but in a constructive way. It's not about attacking people because they're different. So it's about remembering that those people who are different to you actually complement your strengths by filling your gaps with their own strengths, and that helps everyone to grow, which is why I feel it's so important to focus on. So I think you mentioned earlier, Anita, that diversity really enables groups and individuals to get stronger, whether it's small teams or whether it's whole societies, because it enables that diversity of thought. So I know it might be simpler and much more comfortable to have those around you who are like you and think like you. I mean, then there'd be no arguments. However, then you're not developing and you don't have that opportunity to grow. And something that organisations know very well, that if you're not growing or getting better, you'll quickly be overtaken by those who are. And that's whether you're talking on an individual level, so you'll be overlooked for a promotion or inclusion in a group, or whether as an organisation your competitors are going to take over, or at a country level, if you refuse to include a broader diversity of community or accept that, then you're going to fall behind and find yourself struggling even as at a country level. So
thanks, Kate. I agree with so much of what you said. And Nick?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, look, I mean, from my personal perspective and I guess from WSP's perspective, diversity really for me is just about, you've got to be genuine about giving everyone the same opportunities regardless of gender, age, race, background. However, I think to succeed at that, you need to provide an environment for success. And then you need to be patient with that process, to achieve the outcomes that we're all, as a collective in the mining sector, and particularly from I guess a service provider, being a consulting organisation, to provide that input into the broader sector. There's a lot of planning needs to go into. It just doesn't happen naturally. You've got to be patient, planned, and to really execute on that strategy, and that's what we're doing. We talk a lot about removing that unconscious bias. So I know for me personally, it's just been recalibrating myself and thinking more laterally about diversity and about the team we've got, and whether it's gender diversity, whether it's just we've got a lot of engineers from different parts of the world working in our organisation now, and it's just we get really great outcomes with that diversity. You don't want to have a team of full forwards in a football sense. You need to have a broad team with different perspectives on things, and it's proven you get much better outcomes.
Thanks, Nick. Again, another really great answer. And for those of you who are online, we're just about to put an audience poll up where we're going to ask you what will have the most impact on diversity and a reality on making diversity a reality in the industry. So I think Lucy's going to pop that up, and if you can do the poll, that would be great. We'll keep going in the meantime. So Kate and Nick and Alex, you're all heavily involved in women in mining, and gender is obviously an important area for all of us and everyone who's on the webinar as well. When we talk about gender diversity, we know that many companies in the mining industry have committed to improving diversity within their organisations, but these initiatives don't seem to be translating into real diversity. Why do you think that is? I'll start with you, Kate.
It's hard. It's really, really hard to build diversity into an organisation, let alone an industry. We're not talking about making the changes that the mining industry is relatively good at. Well, you'd like to think that we're relatively good at. So something such as changing out a fleet of trucks, committing to that improvement of diversity, like real diversity within an organisation, actually involves shifting the makeup of the employee base. So it's some really difficult changes there, and it involves putting in place systems, processes, technology, and that cultural piece that's inclusive and supportive of that more diverse workforce. So if you think about the nuts and bolts of that, essentially that means that if we're really looking to improve diversity and we start to do it, we're actually changing and potentially breaking down things that may have been in place and working for many, many years. So this includes the support that's been in place for the traditional workers, but maybe not for those who have been different. And for most people, that sort of change is really hard to work through, even if you're really supportive of improving diversity, because it means really challenging the core of who you are and who your team is and how you work as a business. So this type of change is really hard. It takes time, it takes continual focus, and there really needs to be the recognition that it's unlikely to ever go away, that difficulty, because as a community, whether it's a small team or an organisation, you're going to be constantly changing. So I really think that's why it hasn't translated into real diversity yet, because people just haven't understood the magnitude of change and personal struggle that comes with it, even if they're supportive of it.
Okay. And Alex?
Yes, I totally agree with what Kate's just said, and I guess I'll continue on with what I was saying before around STEM mining women, because that's what I advocate mostly on. If we focus more on retention and development of STEM mining women, preparing them for the leadership pipeline, we would have to change the traditional model of work to one which is more inclusive and flexible, enabling women with family caring responsibilities to survive and thrive within mining companies where their roles are predominantly to support 24/7 remote operations. Currently, most STEM mining women end up in consulting once they have families in order to have flexibility. And they also often feel cognitive dissonance with the lived internal culture and values of many mining companies. It's hard for women who prefer working in cooperative and collaborative environments to succeed in an adversarial and highly competitive environment. And there's often the subtle undertone of the double bind, which is that women who are assertive and competitive top performers are bitches, and women who are nurturing and supportive of their teams are not leadership material. So they miss out on the promotions, the mentoring, and the developmental opportunities that their male counterparts most likely will receive. And the cultural, organisational, structural and job design change that is required to enable a more flexible model can be facilitated by the digital transformation of mining. And that will help everyone to find a better balance between work, family and community. And the side effect of this will be better attraction and retention of skilled professionals and better connectedness with and responsiveness to societal expectations, which will improve morale and a sense of pride in our industry. So by retaining and developing our mining STEM women, we'll eventually improve their representation in leadership, which will have a compounding effect on improving the industry's culture and public image, which will attract more top talent. So it's a virtual cycle, or a virtuous cycle.
Thanks, Alex. And Nick, do you want to take us through your thoughts?
Yeah. Look, I mean, we're definitely seeing, to Alex's point, from a consulting perspective, we're seeing, a fair degree of success of bringing women back into the workforce and working in, the more office-based style of environments. I think the challenge continues in the field with creating that environment for female engineers to get up to the sites and get that site experience. So for me and I think for the firm, it needs to be genuine, and it's got to be led from the top down. You can't have systems and processes in place that aren't then supported. So I mean, we're a consultant, we're working with the big mining companies, and unless those mining organisations are consistent and supportive, it is difficult for us if there's not an environment to allow us to support those organisations, particularly when we're talking about deploying female engineers into the field. So I think we're seeing an improvement in that in terms of breaking down that blokey startup culture. I agree that technology is continuing to improve that. I mean, why do you need to go to site? Could you not fulfill part of your function from a project-based or an office-based environment? So changing that whole FIFO culture where you can is also important, but also giving female engineers the opportunity to go to the field and creating an environment to allow that to occur is really, really important.
Thanks, Nick. Some really good comments there. And I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, you can drop them into the question box. Any comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Nick, I've got another question for you. WSP is an international organisation, and like many other international mining and METS companies in Australia, you work across, as you mentioned earlier, such a diverse group of races and ethnicity. What are some of the challenges and also some of the opportunities that you can talk to us about and that you see companies facing in this area?
Sure. Well, I think one of the big challenges we see is as a firm is really just identifying why diversity is important to anyone, to your business, to our business. In other words, what is the business case for it? This, in my view, and in the firm's view, this helps everyone from senior leadership down through to graduates to really understand why diversity is important. And why we as a business why we're investing time and energy into it. So it's really the why piece. Another challenge for us is really what type of diversity is important to your business. So it's important to focus on some key areas. So 3 areas we're focused on at WSP. Obviously, one is achieving gender balance and encouraging more women to the industry. We've got a goal of 30% leadership in client-facing and leadership roles within the firm globally, and we're on the journey of that and very close to that, with a view to getting to 50-50 in the next few years. The other one, from a diversity perspective, that we're strong on is really providing opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employees. And we've got some really great initiatives in place, and we're starting to see some success in that area. And the other one, obviously, is just making WSP an inclusive place for LGBTI employees, and we've just recently run a Vibe program in the last couple of weeks. So that's been really successful. In terms of opportunities, I think as a global organisation, we've got the opportunity really to tap into a much bigger talent pool, not only within we're about 46,000 around the world now, but also accessing other specialists from around the globe, from outside of our organisation. So that's a fantastic opportunity. We are competing, as a consultancy firm or as a mining sector with other large sectors for talent. So we need to understand that. And I think the other opportunities, we just continue to partner with our clients in relation to alignment with diversity. It builds much stronger collaborative relationships with our clients. So so that's probably a high-level summary.
Thanks so much, Nick. I think we had some really interesting points in there. I see that one of our, although I don't know how to scroll back up, one of our webinar attendees was asking about diversity beyond male to female, and I think you touched on some really good points there, not just gender balance, but also talking about Indigenous as well as LGBTI employees as well. So I think in our next questions, perhaps we can all try and work some of those areas in as well. Another question that's come in that I'd like to ask everyone before we move forward is some people, we obviously mentioned quotas earlier. I'd be interested to understand from all three of you, maybe start with Alex, do you think that quotas work?
I debated this very topic with one of our past ministers, Brendan Grills, at a Gold Industry Group event last year. And I had to tweak my argument. I was for quotas, but I don't agree with just a generic quota. I actually think that undermines the women who actually do have actually achieved the qualifications and experience. It gives them credentials, that gives them merit, as seen in the eyes of most of the people who are looking for talent, they talk about the meritocracy. And when you have very generic quotas where the bar is rather low, it dilutes our point of difference for the women, particularly the STEM mining women, the mining engineers, geologists, geotechnical engineers, metallurgists, surveyors, environmental scientists who've got deep domain mining backgrounds. So I agree with quotas, but only if they are meant to be retaining a high barrier to entry and enabling the women who've already got the qualifications, experience and credentials, opportunities to develop their careers further and get into the leadership of the industry. I know that you still need to attract new talent and the younger people. So maybe it's some kind of a two-tiered arrangement, but at the moment I feel it's heavily weighted towards attraction and a very low barrier to entry. And I think it's hurting the women who actually have earned the right to be in the industry. And how do we help them stay in the industry, enjoy their careers, have fruitful, rewarding careers?
Okay, and Kate, do you think quotas work?
I think they have the potential to work. I think, unfortunately, as Alex talked about, where they've been put in place, quite often they have undermined the success of the system because we haven't put all of those systems and processes in place around it, and we haven't made sure that it's, people aren't just ticking a box by putting someone in there. I do think it's really important, and I've had this discussion with many people along my travels, normally younger women who really feel put out that they could ever get a role not based on merit. And it's around this discussion of this meritocracy that Alex has alluded to a couple of times. Merit is generally based upon the status quo. So what we actually think has merit is only merit in the eyes of a particular group of people in the current system, which in the end was set up by Anglo-Saxon middle-aged men called Peter and Andrew and the like. That's just what our, particularly our industry, has been set up around. So it's very hard to say that people have merit if they don't conform with that mould. So I really do think that they're important, but there are, there's so many intricacies and other requirements that have to happen around it to make sure that they do work, because otherwise they just become tick in the box, and then you're setting everyone up to fail because you're putting people in place that either don't have the support or the skills. Even if we put in some really experienced, let's say women, for example, in a role, if people around them don't support them being there because they think they're just there to be a quota, that's never going to work for anyone.
Okay. And Nick, do you have any thoughts on quotas before we move forward?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned that before. I think generally, consulting organisations and we have those targets in place and we strive very hard to achieve them. I think we're making good inroads there. But I think it gets back to my point before: is you need to be, and Kate mentioned it, you need to be genuine with gender diversity, particularly from a development and leadership perspective. So you need to have those processes in place, and you need to drive them, but it needs to be driven and earned in a genuine way. So yeah, there's definitely challenges there, and we need to continue to work hard to break down those barriers.
Okay, thanks everyone. There's a couple more questions there that I'll come back to if we have enough time, but one of them does relate to the future workforce and also STEM and which leads into our next question, which is around the workforce of the future, which is another really key topic for the mining industry right now. Pulling together of people, culture and technology, and ensuring organisations are ready for these agile and dynamic workforces that are indeed flexible. So with the people side, how do each of you see the mining industry attracting and retaining the younger generation and bringing them into this industry whilst also supporting the ageing workforce? And what role do you think that technology and culture will play into this? I'll start with you, Kate. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, look, it's really difficult, and we're in this lovely grey area at the moment. I say lovely with with a beautiful strained smile. We're going through this transition between the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things, and that's this generational shift as well, where the new workforce is coming in, and we've still got the existing workforce in place, and this growing number of older workers as well. So it's, we're in a real transitional space. So we're in this position where the way the industry is operating at the moment and the way that it's operated for decades isn't actually particularly attractive to that older workforce as they start to look to slow down. So like where they're not keen to work those long hours and swings away from home. And it's also proving to be not that attractive either to those entering the workforce, including those who we consider as the diverse candidates who mining organisations see as attractive from their recruitment perspective. Funnily enough, though, the changes that are required to maintain competitiveness in the environment that we're currently facing, where ore bodies are getting deeper and grades are getting lower and sites are getting more remote, to stay competitive, that's going to require significant shifts in technology, operating processes, workforce skills and knowledge. And the point being is that when we bring on that technology, those changes, those technological changes are the things that are most likely also going to make the mining industry more attractive and suitable for the younger, older and more diverse members of the workforce, which is great. So it means that, like, as you bring in new technology, it's already proving to enable greater diversity due to that flexibility and the different skills required and the like. So that will in turn enhance the culture to be more inclusive and diverse, which will then enable greater technological change because we're more open to change and so on. So I actually see it being a spiral upwards. So as we, one thing actually positively impacts the other.
Okay. Alex?
Yes, I feel the same way as Kate. I do think that the digital transformation of mining is very exciting. I've been pretty involved with it for a few years now. It'll bring in a lot of new skill sets. It already has, particularly in the Pilbara iron ore mines, which are calling themselves the Silicon Valley of the mining industry these days. So we're bringing in, artificial intelligence, robotics, coding, cybersecurity, telecommunications, ICT. And these new skill sets are crucial to the digital mine of the future, but they also need to be augmented with traditional skill sets of the mining engineers, geotechnical engineers, geologists and metallurgists and surveyors, if we want to preserve that deep domain expertise that enables finding mines and optimally designing and running profitable and safe mines. And I feel that the new skill sets are going to be the foray of the younger generations who are basically digital natives. And the traditional deep domain expertise is going to be among many generations, young to old. The trouble is that we have trouble retaining that through the cycles of the mining industry, which has up cycles and down cycles. Unfortunately, during the downturns, these skill sets, the traditional deep domain skill sets, are lost. So the focus lately, I've also noticed, because of the focus on the digital transformation, has been on recruitment of fresh, new, young digital native talent. And I think this has been at the expense of bringing back lost skill sets, which is the deep domain experts, and some of that is grey IP, which has got, lived industry experience. And our industry is quite a risky industry, particularly underground mining. So the loss of this grey IP or lived industry experience is quite concerning to me, because I'm very passionate about preventing mining disasters and not learning from the past and repeating the same mistakes. Once digital transformation of mining is more mature, it's widely believed that there'll be less jobs and that those jobs remaining will be less secure. But I think it'll be, the whole industry will be much more interesting, particularly to the younger generations, because it means we'll be able to mine in places like space, mining volcanoes and deep sea environments and things like that. So that's pretty fun. And I know there's a lot of activity at the moment in space science and space startups, and I think that would be definitely very appealing to the younger generation who probably see current state of mining as a bit dirty and dumb.
Okay. And Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've definitely seen the evolution of the mining industry from a technological perspective. It's probably lagged behind other industry sectors. If I look at oil and gas, it's probably been playing a bit of catch up, but it's getting there. I think interestingly for me, some of the advertising, particularly I think we've seen BHP and Rio of recent times, linking lifestyle benefits to the mining sector. So I think the younger generation can actually see that it's not just a big dirty hole in the ground and a remote operation. It's actually, it's in the iPhone that you use, it's in the computer you use, it's in the house you live in. It's linking that so that they see it as an attractive industry to come towards. Technology is going to play an increased part in that with autonomy, and we're seeing a lot of that. My point before, flexibility in terms of field experience and also working in a flexible environment, so people can balance work life and have a life outside of work. I think that will only continue to attract younger people to the sector. I think the point about the grey hairs is really valuable. I mean, it's really important that we don't lose that knowledge as it exits the market. So we do a lot of hard work around mentoring and hooking up younger engineers with older engineers, and I think maybe as an industry, perhaps we could do more of that as a collective. That could be really valuable. Bringing back older people, reduce work hours as they move towards retirement rather than just a hard line. There's no job anymore for you. So I think being flexible, developing the people with experience into mentors is really valuable. On the culture side, I think I touched on earlier the Indigenous piece. So we're doing a lot of good work in bringing Indigenous architects and designs into a lot of the projects that we're involved in. So it's giving us an ability to be able to bring young Indigenous engineers and architectural types of people into the sector, and that's been really quite powerful for us, and just the cultural diversity globally, to be able to move people around, which we're doing into different jurisdictions to give people different experiences in different locations, is really powerful.
Thanks, Nick. I think you touched on some really great points in there, and I certainly, I know we've got some comments coming through on the webinar that you mentioned as well, and obviously that works really well into our next question, which is something that I feel quite strongly about. Working in the event space, while many companies in the industry say that they're committing to improving diversity both within their own company and within the industry, it often does not translate into what we see or represented at an event or across the board. How important do you think it is for companies to actively promote the diverse individuals in their organisations for things like speaking at events or joining working groups and also getting involved in boards? Do you want to take that one first, Alex?
Yes, thanks, Anita. I think it's extremely important. I go to mining events and conferences and lament the poor representation of women and other forms of diversity at these forums. I know they're out there, but nobody can see them. They're off the radar. And I see them as the grinders, working at sites or at the office, out of sight, out of mind of mining's leaders. So they're not aware of the talent that's available to them. Industry events, leadership courses and awards are opportunities to establish reputations in the industry, make connections, and get a good broad industry landscape, a good understanding of that. It's how fresh perspectives can be injected into dialogue, and it's how we prevent groupthink and mediocrity. International Women in Mining has an initiative called I Win Speak Up, which is about getting women into mining conferences and onto panels as speakers to help with this. And I do believe they've helped IMARC this year. And we're also pretty passionate about helping to develop a really good data set of you know, what women are out there in terms of their profession. What sort of, what are they? Are they a mining engineer or a geologist or a truck driver or an electrician? You know, get some really good granular data on the women that are in the industry, how old they are, whether they're, you know, got caring responsibilities or not, what stage of their career are they at, and are they, is there evidence that their careers are progressing and they're, you know, they're being retained and they're having a pretty good career, or are they dropping off? There's not enough data on this, and I think we need that to help us come up with some really good advocacy and policy to make a difference.
Thanks, Alice. I think you raised some really good points, and I know that you mentioned IMARC and the International Mining and Resource Conference. Our producer Shireen works really hard to encourage companies when they submit their speakers for the program to, you know, submit diverse groups, not just women and men, but also culture, and make sure that we've got a really good cross-section. And you know, I absolutely acknowledge your help that you've given us in that area. Nick, someone that we work with quite often, WSP, do you want to comment on this as well?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned before on the gender side, you know, 2019, you know, we've got a 24-25% initial target with our leadership and client-facing females that are in the organisation, and we're close to achieving that. So I think for me it gets back to that removing that unconscious bias. We've got to be very proactive about thinking, planning ahead about you know, making sure that we're getting diversity, not just gender, but just diversity in general, into a number of the forums and conferences that we attend and we also present at. So that's diversity in terms of culture, and even sending some of our younger engineers along to some of those forums so they can interact with you know, with the greater mining sector. So I think we've got to continue to really push hard in that area. I think the other aspect, you know, talking about role models, I think for younger female engineers in particular, and just more generally across diversity, it's really good for younger people to be looking to identify role models, and that could be within the organisation, but it could also be particularly strong women who have achieved outside. So that's something that we encourage through our Thrive development program.
Thanks for that, Nick. I'll just mention there, because we've got a few comments coming in around that, the student and the age gap, that IMARC has launched a new initiative this year with the Victorian Government, which is our Next Gen program, and that program is aiming to bring students, graduates, future leaders into IMARC and help to start that conversation, and to make sure that we have a representative part of the attendees at IMARC, of the 7,000 people that is made up of students and young leaders and graduates, so we can start that conversation and make sure that they have a direct link to companies, and you know, not just students who are studying within this industry, but also those outside of it, to show them what the opportunities are and how they can engage. So Kate, I will pass over to you now if you want to answer this question.
Sure. So really agree with what Alex and Nick spoke about the fact that it's really important. Nick mentioned just at the end there around the role model side of things, and I'm sure everyone's heard the line, you can't be what you can't see, and it's really important to get those role models in place so people can actually see that that's a journey for them, that's a possible journey for them, particularly for diverse candidates. But interestingly, on the same sort of line of thinking is that you don't know what you don't know, and if the broader workforce at any level of the workforce has never seen diverse candidates in top roles, then they don't know that they can do the job, and they don't know that they can or should support them to get into that. So it's really important that we put in place a system to get people into that space. once we've got a really, like a truly diverse and inclusive culture in place, there will be representation across an organisation at all levels. However, we're certainly not there yet. And this, Nick mentioned before about the stuff that they're doing on unconscious bias, that is still really prevalent around, and many, including those who support diversity, still find it really hard to associate those who don't fit that traditional mould with a senior leadership role, whether that's on a board or a chief executive or in a senior technical role, including those people who we actually feel could do the job really well. We've heard many a time how difficult it is for particular individuals to put their hand up for a role because they think they can't do it, quite often due to having never seen someone like themselves in that role. So we need to really push that to get past the unconscious bias. And then I mentioned it in one of the earlier questions, but it's not just about getting that representation or putting up diverse candidates to speak at conferences or spend some time in different roles unless we put those systems in place to really support them, because otherwise they're going to feel a lot worse and they're probably not going to perform because they haven't got the support in place to enable them to really thrive in those positions. So it's really important to have both sides of the coin there, get them in there, but then also make sure that they're supported in that. So I feel, it's absolutely critical to actively and visibly lift the profiles of diverse candidates.
Okay. So just conscious of time, obviously there's so much to discuss here and there's lots of questions and comments coming through. And one of the key takeaways from this is that diversity needs to be approached from a holistic perspective rather than addressing it from a single angle. So keen to hear some quick thoughts on, and I know it's not a quick answer, but how can the industry shift not only their mindset but also that of the wider community? Nick, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. The way I see it is, we've got to embrace diversity. We've got to live it. We've got to breathe it. It's got to be part of our everyday life. I've talked a lot today about removing that unconscious bias. It's really important that we all self-reflect. That leadership piece, it's got to be strong and committed from above. Otherwise, the foundation blocks aren't there. It's difficult for other people in the ecosystem to execute on diversity more broadly. I think we need to promote success. So when we do have success in those areas, it's really important that we promote that across the sector. But we're also using social media platforms to promote that out more broadly to a much wider audience than ever before. So I think that's really important that we get the message out there when we have success.
Okay, and Alex?
Yeah, I agree with Nick, and I guess I could say this is a pioneering issue. I call myself a woman in the first wave of mining, because when I started in underground mining, women were actually not legally permitted. So it's about having, I guess, projecting out to everybody in the industry and in the community, what are the benefits of this diversity? What are some examples of exemplary companies that are diverse and doing amazing things and performing above the normal? So it's basically about advertising, like Nick said, celebrating success and how that is linked to diversity. Because what we're doing is breaking old rules and busting myths. It's all about communicating the benefits of it.
Okay. Obviously we're running out of time here, so I do want to ask one more question to everybody, but before I do that, I just obviously want to talk about, IMARC is really important topic for the entire industry, and we're really excited to be continuing these conversations at IMARC this year. And as part of IMARC, we have launched we're supporting the Balance for Better program, which is just one of the ways we're trying to be more inclusive. And through that program, we have committed to being more diverse in our speaker lineup. One way we're trying to do that is by having one female in every section of the program. one female on every panel, making sure that we engage with the internationals that are coming in and getting them talking about things that are going on within their regions. We've launched the Next Gen program, which I touched on briefly earlier. So I encourage you to all have a look at those and certainly get in touch and talk to us about how, other areas that you'd like us to diversify in. And we're obviously relying on the industry to help us by asking companies to nominate diverse people to speak, engage, and also attend the event itself. So just as a last question for everybody, and I'll start with you, Kate. If everyone from this webinar were to take away one piece of information that will help them make a difference in promoting diversity in mining, well, what is that for you?
Recognise that individuals can make a difference. This is a thing that everyone is facing, but you can do things within your own personal sphere of influence. And I mentioned earlier that it's about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I suggest that in every situation that you're in, like a meeting, or if you're interviewing someone, or if you're working on a project, if you're not feeling uncomfortable, means there's probably not difference of opinion in the room. So seek out those who challenge you, who might frustrate you, who ask questions, or who come up with ideas you might think are crazy, because inviting those people into your space, into your company, into your teams, if you start inviting difference into those areas, you invite others to do the same as well. So that will start a chain reaction.
Alex?
Yes, and Kate, I love what you said. For me, I think it's about bringing the incumbents along on the journey and helping them to have their aha moment where they can see evidence of the benefits of diversity. And this is where the proxy advisors are so important, because they're providing the industry pull through shareholder power right now. Money talks.
Nick?
I've said it a couple of times, but it's just that for me, and I think we've just got to remove the unconscious bias. How do we do that? You've got to undertake, we all have to undertake personal self-reflection and ask ourselves the question: Are we doing enough as leaders within the sector? What can we do more? How do we change? How do we adapt? Because I think it's important more so than ever that we do work towards a diverse workforce, and that's a lot of that is gender, and we need it in the mining sector. So really, I think everyone should ask themselves, what is it that I can do to make a difference in helping move that spectrum, across in terms of the mining sector and bringing more diversity into our sector. So that's a personal challenge for everyone, I think.
Thank you so much, and I think it's been a really great conversation. There's certainly a lot to think about, and I just want to thank our three panelists, Alex, Kate and Nick. Thank you so much for joining us today and putting so much thought into the questions that we're asking. Thank you everyone for joining in and how interactive you were in the background with the questions and the comments. We'll be publishing and recording of this conversation on Mining Beacon, and we'll email all of the registrants your link once the recording is ready, so keep an eye on your inbox. Obviously, we all encourage you to continue this conversation at IMARC, which will run 29 to 31 October this year. Anyone who's on this webinar is entitled to a 15% discount off your registration. So simply register online using the code DIVWEB and get in touch if you want us to send that to you. We'll be holding many more webinars between now and October when we run IMARC to give you a taste of some of the conversations we'll be having at the event. So keep an eye out for those. Our next webinar will look at the future of plants and processing. Finally, we'll end this webinar with a really short feedback survey, which we would appreciate if you could have a look at. It'll appear on your screen at the very end. And once again, I just want to say thank you so much to all our panelists and for everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.